Okay, great. Okay, for our next presenter, we have Jud Kratzer. Am I saying that right? Mm-hmm. Jud Kratzer has been a fisheries biologist with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department for 19 years. Before coming to Vermont, he earned a master's degree at Penn State University and a PhD from Michigan State University, both in fisheries science. Over the past 13 years, Jud has worked with partners to implement and study the use of large woody material to restore trout streams to conditions expected for streams flowing through old-growth forests.
All right, good afternoon. And yeah, just like Shane had related that Gus talked him into entering a presentation, Shane passed it on to me. I wasn't paying attention to an old growth conference, but I'm glad that he did, because really I don't necessarily usually talk about old growth forests in particular, but as I thought about it, what the work we've been doing really is related. And so with this talk, and I was pleased to be here this morning and hear that fish were mentioned. Of course, Linda Mapes talked about the benefits of fish to the forest. I'm going to talk more about the benefits of mature forest processes to the fish, with some work that we've been doing, which we call strategic wood addition. And so what I want to do is briefly explain what strategic wood addition is, talk a little bit about why we would do strategic wood addition, talking a little bit more about the value of wood to streams and with a particular focus on fish, and then talk about some work that we've done in monitoring the response of brook trout populations to added wood in our streams. All right, so when I explain strategic wood addition, I usually explain it backwards. It's an addition because we're adding something that's lacking. What's lacking is large woody material, and the wood that we're adding comes from the streamside forest. We're using chainsaws to cut the trees into the stream, and then we'll often do some manipulation once it's in there to position it so it's going to be most stable and most effective. And it's very strategic because there's a lot of thought and planning that goes into deciding what streams we're going to work on, what reaches of those streams, and then when we're out there, deciding which trees we're going to take and how we're going to drop them and position them to be most effective. All right, why would we add wood to streams? Shane did a good job of covering a lot of this, but I put this picture up here because, a lot of our streams look like this or worse. And I say that from my perspective, but when a lot of people look at a stream like that, they think that looks great, that looks pristine. And yeah, it's got forested stream banks. There's no roads or houses there, but they're not really thinking about what the stream should have looked like. This is the East Branch Nulhegan River. It had log drives on it for decades, up until I think 1930 or so. And those trees are pathetically small on the stream bank, and they were floating logs on this over and over again every year. And that's why this stream looks the way it does now. That is not great fish habitat. That's very uniform, very shallow. It's very stable. There's no erosion, and that's probably what some people think that looks great because there's no erosion. But it's really not great. It's not what it should be. And that's people seeing rivers today. We're several generations removed from people knowing what our rivers originally looked like. And so the shifting baseline, and maybe many of you have heard this term before, but it really applies to rivers. And I'm just going to read this quote because it really summarizes it well. Over time, knowledge is lost about the state of the natural world because people don't perceive changes that are taking place. In this way, people's perceptions of change are out of kilter with the actual changes taking place in the environment. In other words, due to short lifespans and faulty memories, humans have a poor conception of how much of the natural world has been degraded by our actions because our baseline shifts with every generation and sometimes even in an individual. In essence, what we see as pristine nature would be seen by our ancestors as hopelessly degraded, and what we see as degraded, our children will view as natural. And so we really see that in our rivers and streams. We see it in forest, we see it everywhere. And yeah, what did our rivers originally look like? As Shane really touched on this in some of these pictures, Shane already showed. But these old growth forests with these big trees, a lot of them are dying and falling on the forest floor. A lot of them are falling in the rivers as well. And there was no one there to pull them out. What we've done, when Europeans came, we trapped out the beavers. And eventually then we started harvesting the forests and cutting right down to the stream banks. And we were using the rivers to float those logs out. So we've changed the rivers so that we could make them more efficient at transporting everything, transporting water, transporting wood, organic material, that we made them very efficient at transportation, for floating boats as well. And what they were originally was very inefficient at transporting all of those things. And so we want to restore some of that, bring our streams back a little bit closer to what they were originally. And as a fisheries biologist, I'm really focused on fish, and we really want to do this work for that, acute benefit to the fish populations and also other ecosystem processes. But really, I think the most valuable part of our work is communicating to people that we at the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department and our partners like Trout Unlimited, we value wood and stream so much that we're actually going out there and putting it in. And I think, and to do, in doing that, we're hopefully communicating to people, one thing is we really need to protect our streamside forests. We don't want to be cutting trees in forever. We want the natural process to be restored. So for that to happen, we need to be protecting those forests, allow that process to naturally proceed. It's not happening fast now because we don't have those big mature forests. That's why we're going and cutting trees now. But the other thing is, once the wood is in the stream, let's leave it there. And this is something that's been very apparent as we've had flooding in Vermont, Tropical Storm Irene, other things, that those floods end up putting a lot of wood in the rivers. And the first response of many people is, we need to get that out of there because it's dangerous. And in some cases, yes, if it's on a culvert or bridge, it's endangering some property, then yes, maybe it does need to be removed. But a lot of cases, we want it there. It should stay there. It's good for the river. It makes things more stable. It's better habitat. And people just don't understand that because of the shifting baseline. And so I think this is really ultimately the most valuable part of our work, is showing the value of wood and streams so we can change the culture. That's really what needs to happen, is a culture shift in how we view our forests, but also river processes. All right, so getting into some of the functions of wood and streams that are most relevant to fish. Shane already touched on this. For, the first one, retaining organic material. And in these pictures, you're going to see some of these are structures that we actually did, of trees that we dropped into the stream, our strategic wood addition structures. So here's an example of one, and you can clearly see it's capturing those leaves, which are going to decompose and become food for the insects, which is then food for the fish. Without those trees there, some of those leaves might have caught on the rocks, but a lot of those would have just washed downstream where we already have too many nutrients and too many leaves. Our wood can retain sediment. Again, these are some of our examples. You can see some fine sediment on the upstream side of the structure on the left, and on the right there, if you look downstream of my friend Sam, there is some more cobble and gravel accumulating downstream of that wood jam. And this is something we want to happen in our headwater streams. We generally lack sediment or fine sediment in our headwater streams because they're efficient at transporting that stuff. But there's organic material in that, there's food, there's substrate for spawning, and we want to keep that up there rather than it just washing downstream and ending up in our big rivers or our lakes where we already have too much sediment. And by accumulating sediment, we can narrow the channel. You're seeing that on the right there because that gravel bar is forming. we're narrowing the channel during low flow conditions, which decreases the surface area of the water that's exposed to the hot air or to the sun, and hopefully keeps things a little bit cooler. And then scouring the stream bed, making it a little bit deeper, which is important for fish habitat. The wood that we're adding can form pools, and this happens naturally as well. Wood in streams can form pools on the upstream side or scour pools on the downstream side, and pools are important habitat for fish and other species, especially in the winter. I'm told that wood turtles like to hibernate under these type of things in the winter as well, get in and around those logs during the winter in our rivers and streams. And also in improving floodplain access. So by kind of reversing this trend of having our rivers be really efficient at moving water, by adding wood into the stream, we're creating these obstructions that make them less efficient. So when we have high flow events, we are in some cases able to push those flows out into the forest. And where, in the up here where we don't have infrastructure, we don't have houses, we want flooding to occur because we can have the water soak into the ground, it can drop out sediment materials that it's carrying, rather than that just all rushing downstream where we all live. All right, and these are some data from some of our structures. We have 931 included in this pie chart that shows some of the functions that we've documented at our sites. And you see the big three there: retaining organics, providing cover, retaining sediment. And I just want to point out that brown bar that says none. That means that's a site where enough of the wood has moved that it's no longer performing a function at that site. And some of these go back to 2012, and we've had multiple floods. So the fact that we have 85% of our sites still performing at least one function, I think, is really good indication that this can be done safely and effectively. And the ones that aren't performing a function where we originally placed them, it just means they're somewhere else in the system, like on a boulder, an outside bend, floodplain. They're still functioning, it's just not where we originally placed them. And if you want more information on strategic wood addition, I recommend you just search in Google for Vermont Strategic Wood Addition. You'll find a website that has some more presentations by me, and you can find this handbook. Or feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk more about it. All right, finally getting into the fish. So the way we did this study, we used electrofishing, where we're using electricity to stun the fish, and we can net them, measure them, weigh them. And we had 2 years of data before we added wood at 9 pairs of control and treatment sites. And then we added wood to everything but the control sites. And in our original study, we sampled for another 4 years. And then we took some time off, and then we sampled again in years 9 and 10. All right, and this is what we found. This is brook trout biomass. So this is the total weight of the population. So it incorporates the number and the size of fish. Treatment sites are in yellow, control sites are in orange. And very clearly, we had a big bump in brook trout biomass within those first 4 years. In fact, it tripled on average in places where we added wood. And it came down a bit in years 9 and 10, which isn't that surprising. But to make it a little bit easier to compare through time, I added these dashed lines in that show the average biomass at control and treatment sites before we added wood. And at years 9 and 10, we still are above what we had beforehand. One thing to point out here, people often ask how you know you're not just concentrating fish in the areas of good habitat, and that may be what was happening in years 1 and 2, where you see control sites went down while treatment sites went up. That might have been us pulling fish into the better habitat. But then even the control sites went up in years 3 and 4, which probably is related to we're not just benefiting fish in places where we're actually adding the wood. We're increasing the productivity of the system by capturing that organic material, capturing the fine sediment. And I just want to talk a little bit about why we think abundance went down in years 9 and 10. It was not because of the amount of wood. It was, as you can see here, the number of pieces of wood has stayed pretty similar. What has changed is the quality of the wood. And I'll just show that with an example. This is a site from 2012. In the fall of 2012, right after we installed it, this is what that site looked like the following year in 2013. Still really sound, lots of branches, even some fine needles there. And then this is what it looked like in 2018. We lost some of that wood underneath. There's still, you can see pieces of wood there, but they're not as big. We've lost those fine branches. So the wood's still there. It's still functioning, still benefiting fish and other things. It's just not as quality as it was originally. And that's kind of what we expect. And this is why ultimately what we want to have happen is the natural process be restored. We don't want to have to keep doing this. We want those big trees on the stream banks that are eventually going to fall in, and they're going to stay there and function. But I will say that one thing we try to do at every site is get at least one log down on the stream bed that will become waterlogged and potentially stay there for centuries. This is just a picture of an old log drive dam on one of the rivers we work on. That wood's at least 100 years old and still sound because it's been submerged with water. And so every site we do, we're trying to get at least one log that's going to end up like that, and there's going to be stuff on top that we know will go away. And we've had some success, it seems, with getting this stuff that's going to function, hopefully, for centuries. And I just want to thank our partners, especially Trout Unlimited, but without our partners, none of this would have happened. And it's my understanding now that we'll open it up to questions
Yes,
for me or Shane. So,
thank you.
but yeah, thank you.